Hello and welcome to India Career Center, the one-stop podcast for students, professionals, parents and guardians. In every episode, we will try to deal with a current topic that needs expert advice related to career guidance and career mentoring. Please welcome your host, Dr. S.P. Mishra to the show and happy listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode on India Career Center. Today, I'm extremely delighted to welcome back Mr. Vipin Sondi to my podcast. About a year back, I had the pleasure of hosting him, and we are doing one more episode today to talk about how India can do well in terms of evolving as a product nation. Mr. Vipin Sondi doesn't need any introduction, but I will give a very brief introduction about him. So Mr. Vipin Sondi is a seasoned leader in manufacturing and engineering sector with over almost 4 decades of experience, stellar academic background from IIM Ahmedabad and IIT Delhi. He has spearheaded some of the best brands in the industry like JCB, Ashok Leyland, and before that, of course, he has been leading in other organizations like Tecumseh India. He has worked in Tata Steel, Shriram Honda, and so on and so forth. And he has been recognized with numerous accolades for his leadership and excellence. His contribution extends beyond industry as he actively participates in various national councils and charitable organizations. With those words, I welcome Mr. Sondi for the conversation today. Sir, it's a great pleasure to welcome you back again on the conversation, and thank you for your time today.
Great pleasure, SP, to be back, and always good to be speaking with you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, while preparation for the particular episode, I was trying to find out about what is our current status in terms of exports in 2024. And the number I get is it's approximately about 650 billion US dollars for the year 2024. And broadly, it is divided into two parts. One part is the merchandise, which includes the made in India products, the products which are made and exported, and other products also like the agriculture output and so on and so forth. So that is roughly about 325 billion US dollars. And the balance around 280 is the services exports which happened in 2024. And the context of discussion today is to talk about how India can actually progress as a nation, which is focused on products. And I got motivated about this particular topic after reading your article in one of the leading newspapers a few months back, and that's how I thought of reaching out to you. And so, as a opening remark, so tell us your view about how India can actually take this initiative of focusing and becoming a more of a product nation, and what are the various inputs which, as a nation, we should be taking care.
SP, thanks a lot. No, it's a great question. And for those of us who've been involved in manufacturing, the word product nation really is different because actually, unfortunately, in India, manufacturing equals shop floor. And manufacturing doesn't mean shop floor. It means R&D, it means branding, it means design, etc. And therefore, the need to kind of redefine it as product. And therefore, let's become a product nation so that the definition itself is all-encompassing. That's extremely important. Now, the Prime Minister himself has been talking about Make in India. And again, the definition then becomes manufacture in India. But then in the Independence Day, in the recent Independence Day address, or maybe the year before that, he talked of design for India, design for the world. So this is in addition to his call for a sustained focus of India becoming a global manufacturing hub. And a product nation, therefore, is, let's say, a series of companies that would focus on research and development, concept creation, through branding, distribution, after-sales service, and of course, the physical part, which is the manufacturing process itself. Now, this is best explained, and since you referred to the article and I'd seen the smile curve of a gentleman called Stan Shi, who's the head of Acer in Taiwan, who in the early 1990s was, let's say, an outsourcing hub for IBM and Compaq, only to manufacture in the traditional sense of producing goods through a particular process. But what he found was that these big companies continued to gain recognition. Their brand was what was recognized in the market, and his wasn't. And therefore, he decided to invest both backwards as well as forwards. That means in research, in innovation, forwards in terms of branding, distribution, service, etc. His company, Acer, then now needs no introduction. And what he then created was what was called the smile curve. It's really what he plots is really to look at higher value added of the product in the ends of the smile curve, with the physical manufacturing being at its lowest point. In terms of value addition, now that doesn't mean for a country like India, we don't have to do the physical manufacture. That is an integral part of it. We have to create jobs for our people. We have to create let's say, indirect jobs. For every manufacturing job, perhaps 7 indirect jobs get created. But we mustn't lose track of the fact that we've got to invest in R&D and innovation, that we've got to create brands which go overseas as well, that we've got to ensure that product support or service through a distribution network will be the way that we can reach the customer. And the customer pays much more for that than the physical product itself. So that was this whole concept that it's important for us to develop product companies which together, when taken together, create a product nation. Now that's as far as manufactured goods are concerned. The same applies to services as well. And we won't get into that because that's not an area of my expertise. But the Microsofts and Googles, etc., have products. How many of our software products are known around the world? And that is extremely important, that the same smile curve applies equally to the service industry as well.
Yes, sir. I mean, taking this analogy, I mean, I think in the early 90s, we saw a lot of Indian software companies coming into the fore, and they started actually, sending out a lot of their experts outside India, as well as created some sort of work for the foreign, their partners outside India. What we have started seeing is that also there is a flurry of organization which are opening their global capability centers in India, which probably about a decade and a half ago, it was just call centers. But I think they have grown beyond that and creating much bigger value addition in India. I think, what is your take in that?
Not as optimistic as so the talent that is being used by the global capability centers, which are now, you're absolutely right, they started as back office operations and then started creating value and moved up the value chain. But who are they serving? They are serving global brands. So how many global capability centers are Indian companies setting up? And how many global capability centers are being invested for the medium and long term by Indian companies? There are probably around 1,500 GCCs currently in India and growing rapidly and providing employment to our best technical brains, and perhaps even stopping the brain drain, because many people then prefer to remain in their country and even then in their hometowns or close to their hometowns. But how many are working for an Indian brand? And that's the question we have to ask. And that's what we need to move forward with.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think this is where we need to move forward. Sir, you being part of the manufacturing sector yourself for almost 4 decades, Can you give a sense of how manufacturing has grown in India in terms of some values?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. So let me go back to your first question. Again, coming back to the advantage of being a product company, and look at Apple Inc. Apple Inc. has a market capitalization of over $3 trillion, and we know that. But Apple's largest contract manufacturer, Foxconn, which does the physical part, it has a market capitalization of approximately 85 billion. So you're talking of 85 billion versus over 3 trillion. That is the difference between physical manufacturing and manufacturing in a holistic sense, which we are talking of as a product company and therefore a product nation as well. Now, coming back to your second question, for over 4 decades, and actually all the 4 decades that I've had the privilege of working in manufacturing, our contribution to GDP, manufacturing's contribution to GDP, has been of the order of 15 to 17%. And it's pretty much stagnant there. It is stationary there in terms of percentage. Our target from the time that, let's say, in my late 20s and early 30s, the target that the government was setting was 25% of GDP. And that's right, because we have to create jobs and we have to create infrastructure for that. But that hasn't happened. It doesn't mean that manufacturing hasn't grown. GDP has grown, and therefore manufacturing has grown. But in percentage terms, it hasn't. Now, this can be a little disappointing to people who are coming in new into the sector, and they look at the past trend and they look at percentage to GDP, and it's a flat line. We work far greater with targets with numbers, absolute numbers. So if I were to do a back of the envelope calculation, and this could be a little up or down, but that'll depend on what government figures give up. But fundamentally, back of the envelope, if we are to be at $4 trillion GDP in 2024-25, and manufacturing we take at the conservative part of, let's say, 15% and not 17, we take 15%, it's 0.6 trillion US dollars. So let's start talking absolute numbers. Now, what happens is, our target for 2030, estimated target for GDP in 2030-31 could be approximately $6 trillion. And if manufacturing can move from 15 to 17% of GDP to 20% of GDP, in these 6 years, we can go to $1.2 trillion, which means from 0.6 to $1.2 trillion, doubling in numbers. Now that can be broken down sectorally and focused and targeted sectorally. If we extrapolate to 2047-48, which is India at 100, NITI had projected a GDP of $30 trillion, by which time at least we must move towards a 25% of GDP as the contribution of manufacturing. That is $7.5 trillion. Now it's a matter of putting it together as to which sectors, how much these sectors, and how much it can contribute. And no longer is it flatlined. And that can be targeted, focused, and also motivational to those who are participating in this part of the economy.
Sir, from 0.6 trillion to 1.2 trillion looks really mind-boggling and too ambitious. I mean, how do you see this happening?
No, while it's ambitious, let's like you talked about exports, for example. The automobile components industry last year was targeted by the minister, and they accepted the target to make a roadmap of how $20 billion exports last year could go to $100 billion by 2030. The construction equipment industry, of which you and I are a part, also in these 6 years is looking at least doubling their revenue base, of which exports is a significant part. And I'm sure electronics, and we've heard about electronics, hardware, etc. So it may not happen. But sector by sector, if we break it down, that everybody has a target to pursue in whichever sector he or she is playing. And then find a way, a roadmap to get there. Is it mind-boggling? The answer is yes. Have we done it before? No. But unless we take these bold, ambitious figures and say, what is my role in these ambitious figures, we could well remain flatlined for the future.
I agree. I think we need to have some target. And I believe India as a nation, through various initiatives, we are trying our roadmaps also. But so can you give us a sense, as you see things from CII perspective also, which is more like a organization which is actually like the conduit between the real industry as well as the government and the policymakers. So what are the various steps we are doing as a nation? Some of it probably is already being done. So if you can help us to understand about that.
Yeah, sure, SP, definitely. But let me again go back to and answer the question, but let me at least go back and give you examples of product-based nations. And we know them, but if you list them down, USA is, Germany is, France is, Japan is, we've grown up hearing about them. These are product-based nations because they cover the entire spectrum of the smile curve. But when you look at the last maybe 2 decades or so, South Korea, China, even Taiwan are transforming into product-based nations. So when you look at then product-based companies in these nations, we know them. Samsung, great brand. There's LG. And Samsung started from a trading company. It was just a trading company. China's Huawei, we know that it might be banned, etc., but it was a small telecom equipment provider and is a global tech leader now. Taiwan's HTC, or now, of course, in semiconductors, TSMC, but then again, I don't know how much branding they have. The brand is elsewhere, but definitely HTC. They've manufactured to become a global smartphone brand. So there are many examples that exist. Nike, Adidas, H&M. They source their manufacturing, which is the physical part, but the branding, the designing, the distribution, the outlets, that's all part of what these apparel companies and footwear companies go around with all around the world. Okay, so coming to your question as to what has India done, which is, let's say, in the last 10, 14 years, India done. Make in India has become a very important part of the government's program. And in this budget, just let's say 2 or 3 weeks ago, a national manufacturing mission has been announced. What the contours are, we don't know, but there's certainly a recognition of that. Now, Make in India, when it was announced, I think in 2014, it essentially spoke about establishing India as a global manufacturing hub. Again, target of 25% to GDP contribution of manufacturing and 100 million new jobs. Now, that's very important. It's important to define how many jobs is each company, each sector, and therefore the nation creating, and therefore what are the skills required for that. Then, of the recent past, no rocket science there, there's the PLI scheme. While it's called production-linked scheme, it's really a sales-linked scheme. It's only if you sell do you get that additional benefit. But 14 key sectors have been identified, and it's succeeded in some sectors, perhaps not yet in other sectors. But it's in a way to incentivize, to keep selling so that you can keep producing. Then you have a focus on deep tech and emphasis on semiconductors, where a massive amount of incentive is being given for trying to capture the entire value chain, from design through to chips, and then coming to packaging and marketing as well. And there is a lot of interest over there. There is a quantum mission that's been launched as well. Infrastructure development in the well, it's there. We've seen the focus on infrastructure in terms of physical infrastructure, roads, highways, ports, railway stations, etc. The government has enhanced public spending virtually in every budget, not by 5 or 7%, but sometimes by 30, 35%. Now it's, let's say, reached somewhat of a peak, but that amount of money was significant. So infrastructure development, but in the last budget, the creation of infrastructure parks or industrial parks. What people want, those who want to manufacture, want a plug and play kind of facility. They also want some kind of social infrastructure. So not only the physical infrastructure, but social infrastructure, schools, hospitals, etc. So industrial parks is a good way of creating that requisite space so that people who want to invest come in, and employees then can come in much easier, so because they don't have to worry about the softer aspects and they can focus on their work. And then we have the Skill India missions. Now, this is to equip, let's say, 400 million individuals with industry relevant skills to address workforce gaps. Now, all of it may not have happened, but there are a series of councils at least working on skills. And there is, let's say, a recognition that skills is perhaps the way to go for a larger part of our people, especially since technology is changing so rapidly. So there's lots happening from, let's say, from the government standpoint. The action takes place at the states. And some states have been more proactive, and we've seen that not only in the last 10 years, but for 3 or 4 decades. We know that there are certain states which are proactive as far as promoting manufacturing is concerned. Some of them have automobile hubs, some of them have capital goods hubs, some of them have hosiery hubs. So there are these hubs being created, which there's nothing wrong with that. We must have specific areas, specific geographies in the country where there are inherent strengths of our people. And those then become cluster-like hubs for those particular sectors. Not everybody has to do everything. But that's the way India is growing. Back to you, SP.
Sir, while government has been taking quite a few initiatives, and some of it has created some impact already. But do you think, I mean, especially this comes from a lot of sectors where it is criticized that the private sector is actually investing far less. I mean, probably they are cautious because they are looking at it, the opportunities from a global perspective, not just from India perspective. But this is a criticism we often hear from the popular media, that the private sector is not investing enough in terms of helping India to become a manufacturing hub or a product nation. And what is your view on that?
Yeah, that criticism is there. See, when private industry invests, it's only going to invest if there's going to be a demand for it, for their products. And normally investments take place when capacity utilization has reached 80 to 85% of the existing capacity. What's happened over the last few years, the criticism itself is fair. The question is, how much risk do you want to take, etc. And because you're very often run by the way markets are going to look at you, there is a certain amount of cautious investment. I think we've reached a stage now where capacity utilization is reaching its 80 to 85%. And we will see more and more investment. But having said that, it's important that there be demand and demand creation. Well, somebody will spend, either it'll be imported or you'll manufacture in your country. But if there's no demand, then neither works out. Now, what I think the finance minister has done in this budget, and I think it's good economics, has tried to put more money in the hands of the middle class so that they consume more of the right things, obviously, but consume more. Consumption goes up. If consumption goes up, then demand will go up. And if demand goes up, then we reach a situation where capacity utilization becomes a conversation in boardrooms for investment. Your overall remark is correct. We haven't seen the kind of private investment, but it comes only when there is adequate demand.
What you're saying is, obviously, the finance minister has, through the budget, tried to create demand in India, the domestic consumption. But I think we still have a larger area to explore, which is the global demand. I think that is where we still have a lot to work.
Everything we do, we must have ultimately the global picture in mind. So, I mean, we've always been a votary that have a strong domestic base and use that strong domestic base to go overseas. But for a strong domestic base, often we didn't have products that were of global capacity, capability, and quality. It is extremely important that whatever we see, we design for global quality, we manufacture for global quality, we set up processes for global quality, we subscribe to international standards of accreditation and approval. And then once we have that product in position, we can then start creating an infrastructure and a branding overseas. But at no stage can our plan be as you say, for the domestic market, and later on try and modify that product plan for an overseas market. The way we've, SP, you and I have experienced it, we create a frugal platform of a product, but we build on that product based on the specifications that different markets in India and around the world require, so that your basic platform is globally competitive.
Absolutely. Sir, going back to one of your earlier answer about the skill development. Skill development is one big key area where government has taken quite a few initiatives. But since you have been now also part of a lot of councils and so on and so forth, and there's a lot of focus on skill development, do you think that we have an opportunity where actually the skill development and the academia have a much larger role to play actually in terms of addressing those skill development right from the education, rather than depending on the additional skill development which anyway is required? But then can we do much better if we do something at the core education level?
Yeah, so first, I think from a positive sense, the NEP 2020, which came out in 2020 and has celebrated 4 years now, I think it factors in some of the things that you've spoken about. One is it definitely factors in to move away from rote learning and trying to enhance your learnability, where you're curious, you're imagining, and you're working towards, let's say, applying your own mind. Having said that, the skills themselves really start getting, after the basic education, you can either go on for more of education and hopefully align to an outcome at the end of the day, or you start acquiring skills with your hands. Which is through the ITIs and other, development mechanisms that you have, so that you're job ready. What we had over the years was that we had to recruit people and then make them job ready, both from academic institutions as well as from the local ITIs as well. The curriculum of, let's say, the ITIs, to an extent, is being more patterned for the local industry in which that ITI is this thing. So if you're a textile hub, then there's more point in developing skills which are good for, let's say, textile companies. And similar, if it's automobiles, and so forth, etc. Tourism, then it should be for tourism. But having said it, I think there's a great effort going on. The outcome perhaps has not been as significant. Because when we talk of numbers, it's not small numbers. We talk of 400, 500 million people from all strata, different backgrounds, etc., etc. So scaling up is extremely important. And fortunately, today, technology has enabled us to scale up. And I think that advantage is being taken. We've got a lot of young entrepreneurs who are creating packages for a variety of skills or learning for young people that you can apply. But at the end of the day, there has to be a mechanism which, in many ways, is being created, a physical infrastructure, so that you can actually use your hands to be able to see how that skill move forwards. A lot of work to be done, a heck of a lot of work to be done based on the kind of scale that we guys talk about. Industry has a big role to play, obviously. Academia has a role to play. Government has a role to play, and each one has to play their part of the role.
Yeah, I agree. I think NEP 2020 is definitely a good start point, but I guess as you rightly pointed out, the implementation is the big area of hurdle. I think that is where the problem is, and also we still continue to see the government, the academia, and the industry in three different silos, unfortunately, even today. And probably one more revolution, just like the NEP. I mean, at least the NEP background has been created, and on the implementation part, I guess we need some push, and definitely it cannot happen in single silos. It has to combine all these three silos together to bring some solution.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. We've grown up in silos. These silos are, we are finding our way around it. So it's not that nothing's happening. The question is it revolutionary? It isn't as revolutionary as we might have wanted. But let me take one example. The Anusandhan National Research Foundation. So at least there is a recognition now that innovation has to be in the forefront for any country, any company, any sector to be able to flourish at the rate at which change is taking place. So the government has announced, has set up, there is now a CEO for the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, the ANRF. This is under the Department of Science and Technology. And what it does is it encourages collaboration between scientists in India, scientists overseas. It also encourages private and public sector entities to invest in the foundation's activities. So we hope this takes off because there's a lot riding on it. But again, it's like a mission mode that the government recognizes and say, let's go on a mission mode on research and innovation. And then hopefully there will be a critical mass of people, companies, public, private, government coming together. And silo creation, therefore, will be at least minimized, if not taken away altogether. But I just wanted to come to one or two things. You know, it's amazing, and I've written about it, that there are certain core technologies that we as a country must have. Now, if you look at capital goods, to manufacture those capital goods, there are certain technologies that we don't have. For example, and we take, let's say, two examples, lasers or vacuum technology. Now, lasers are used right across all parts, and of course they're used for our eyes as well, you know, LASIK. So it just covers a huge spectrum of industries where lasers are used, but they're definitely used for manufacture of capital goods. Similarly, vacuum, that will be required for quantum computing. You have to create vacuum in so many places for an operation to take place. We are dependent on foreign sources. Now, if for whatever reason, geopolitically, there is a challenge, then your base technology, which is the core technology, if that doesn't get fed to you, it becomes very difficult to move forward. So therefore, perhaps it's be a good idea to audit what are the core technologies and what are the gaps. And we invest in those core technologies. And here, profit is not the motive, it's a strategic requirement for the nation and something that we should look at very, very closely.
So going back again to the topic, so we have seen so far what are the initiatives which government is taking in terms of making sure that we are moving in the direction of becoming a product nation. Now let us look at what are the challenges in the sector. What are the key areas where we have challenges, and how those challenges could be addressed.
You talked of silo working. Siloization itself is a challenge because it's been built over a long period of time. And therefore, question is, how do we find a way to integrate first small groups of people so that it starts becoming a movement? Now, we just spoke about it. We are alive to the fact that research and development and investment in research and development has to be enhanced multifold. So again, this is a number which is oft quoted. Our national spend on research and development, if I remember correctly, is 0.7% of GDP, and it's remained at 0.7% of GDP. GDP has been growing, and this number also has been growing, but not adequately. This is both public and private. Public means government. Government out of this 0.7% spends 70%. We're talking of only 30% with the private. Now you look at what the developed countries have done. They've been at about 2.5% of GDP, with the ratio between public and private being reversed. Private about 60-65%, government 30 to 35% in areas which are critical and which are reserved for strategic reasons. Korea is already at 4% of GDP. So you see the distance we have to travel. So we've got to bring industry, academia, startups with government as the enabler, except in strategic areas like space, like you have defense, etc., where it's doing work. But in many other areas, we've got a lot of government laboratories, some brilliant people. The question is, what is the outcome which is benefiting society or the market or the economy from these research laboratories? So for me, that is a huge point for us to focus upon, because ultimately innovation will come from there. Physical products will come from there. Software products will come from there. And that will enable us to start building brands and making globally competitive products. We should not have to go shopping each time overseas and spend a lot of money, not one time, but be dependent on both technologies and spares for almost a lifetime. And therefore, spending a lot of that money, which could then actually have been used for research and development.
And I was reading a few days back about a report. It's called the Global Innovation Index.
Yeah.
We are progressing in that. I think if you look at the journey from 2014 to now, we have progressed. But we are still at serial number 39, as far as I remember, for the report 2024.
Yeah.
And we have other, I think you mentioned about Korea, China, Taiwan, all of them are, even Malaysia is ahead of us. So is it something that we as Indians, we have to probably bring innovation as a thought process, as a skill, right from the school education, actually? That's where probably we can actually bring this social engineering, so to speak, and that could actually bring up this change.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Only today an article has been published that I've had the privilege of writing with the director of IIT Jodhpur, where for me, humanities is an integral part of STEM education. And the world went the other way. The world went the other way because after World War II, it became extremely important to focus on engineering products. And then division of labor focused it further that each person was so focused and going deep into his or her area. Nothing wrong with that. But arts and humanities then became a completely different stream, which therefore the intersection, forget about intersection, they started diverging. Now, when you come back to here and you see what's happening in AI, for example, and you have brilliant young engineers working for a large tech company who haven't had the opportunity to ask the question, the work I am doing, how will it impact society? Because they have no context. So, should psychology, should sociology, should history be an integral part of STEM education? I strongly feel so. So that you have a context and you ask those questions even as a young person. Now, that also then brings in imagination. It brings in context. It brings in critical thinking. It brings in ethical judgment. And the intersection of all of this is where innovation will take place. It also brings us to the fact that within engineering disciplines, I did mechanical SP. I don't know, what discipline did you do?
The mechanical, sir.
So we both did mechanical. The innovation in mechanical, electrical, chemical, etc., largely incremental. But at the intersection is where innovation is going to take place. The interdisciplinary importance in education is what is going to bring about innovation. And therefore, we need to go back again. Hopefully, there'll be an NEP 2020 something, which will bring in greater focus. And we must give respect in our IITs, etc., which, to tell you the truth, we didn't even, I'm guilty of that in the early 80s, etc. That how much respect did we give to our humanities teachers in our engineering institutions? They must get the same respect, because without that arm being equally strong as the STEM arm, innovation will not take place. Ethically, how are you going to decide if you don't know the social context, historical context? Psychologically, if you don't know your customer or you don't know the person on the street, how are you going to design products for him or her? You take the example of, let's say, a prosthetic limb. Just the other day, somebody was mentioning purely engineering design, and they found that it doesn't work. Because where are the people who are the experts, including the amputee himself or herself, as part of the design process? These are not engineering solutions. These are human solutions. So the moment it's a human solution, all aspects of, or all disciplines relevant to that human solution need to come together.
Agreed, sir. I think there are 2 points which comes to my mind. Number one, I think all our higher education, I mean, at least the undergraduate and beyond, everybody should, irrespective of whatever stream they choose, I think economics and psychology should become a mandatory subject, actually, because going forward in your life, you're going to discuss, I mean, you're going to deal with economics and psychology, because you have to deal with people. That's number one. And number two, I think in India, at the school level, I think we should teach children how to say no and how to ask the right question. I think you mentioned about asking the right question.
Yeah.
These are the areas which I think is mandatory in today's times and will remain relevant, I think, in future also. What do you think?
No, absolutely. And we've got to evolve much faster. I mean, the thing is, these are now becoming so critical. With AI, it has become so critical that are we asking the right questions? AI will grow, AI will flourish, and we must help it flourish. But we must make sure that we are asking the right questions. And the young coders in their 20s, 30s, they have a very small role to play in the overall product. But if they ask the right questions of their superiors, they will seek answers. I totally agree with you. That's a great question, SP.
Moving on, sir, now let's look at how government can collaborate with the private sector. Government has created a lot of frameworks, so to speak. Now, I think we have to do enough in terms of creating that excitement in the private sector in terms of making them come on board in this journey. So what are the various things which government and private sector can collaborate together to do the changes?
I think government's doing enough. Yeah. I really think government's role is of an enabler. They are trying to push hard. They are investing. They're moving, coming up with ideas. We talked of the ANRF. We've looked at the hydrogen mission. There is the quantum mission. These are all critical to the country and therefore being led on a mission mode by the government, but not completely in it. You have the private sector, you have space for the public sector, and you have space for civil society also to participate in that. I think a lot of it now has to come from the private enterprise. A lot of spending on research. I must find it worthwhile to do research, otherwise I will not. Now, the question is, research takes time to pay back. You've got to invest in, if it's 2.5% of your own company's turnover, that's the only way it'll all add up. We are, in most of the companies, it's 1% or less, except in companies where there is a disruption taking place. Automobile has gone up because there's a regulatory disruption. So it's a survival mode. But this must be part of our daily lives. So I would say government enable, stay with strategic areas in whatever is strategic to the country, but create by enablement, policy, infrastructure, and regulation to make sure that these are consistent and these are progressive and not regressive. Okay. But the rest is then up to private people, individuals, societies, companies to start playing their role in taking this movement forward.
So there are a lot of Indian companies who are doing extremely well on the CSR front, for example. Some of them have excellent initiatives ongoing, and a lot of these progressive organizations are into also higher education and doing very well actually in those areas. So do you think government can actually formulate a little more in terms of how they can, if there is a policy which can be created around those, so that if a 2.5% percentage, it's not going to happen just like that. Of course, the private sector is going to see what is the opportunity in it in terms of gaining out of it. But as a policy, if we start making certain percentage as a commitment towards investment towards R&D, will that help? I know it might actually sound as if government is trying to police what the private sector has to do, but I guess as a start point.
SPI, I disagree. Absolutely, we should not mandate it. The market must drive it. Government, again, I'm saying at the cost of repetition, should be an enabler and not a policeman, except in law and order and areas related to that. Governance. Those are the regulation of various kinds. The question then is, how do you create competition where you're forced then to do the right things? And that balance is extremely important, because you do want competition to flourish, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it's not unfair competition, that your own companies in your own country start getting demolished. It's never an easy balance. Having said that, I think that's so, for me, ease of doing business ultimately and the cost of doing business, that's the focus of the government. And government means what? We look at central government. The action is in the states. Land acquisition it's a concurrent subject, but a lot of acquisition in the state, electricity, water, roads, skills, education, a lot of it is run by the government. So that pipeline and enablement is what is important, and that's the role of the government, and they can focus on that. Then it becomes easier to do business. You look at the MSMEs. I mean, we've been talking about them being an industrial backbone, but they survive. I mean, hats off to them very often for even surviving the local, let's say the local ecosystem that exists, which sometimes harasses them or often harasses them. What we need to do is to make it easier for them to do business and try and provide them with the wherewithal to be able to invest and do their business in a very, let's say, positive, easy environment. Costs, yeah, logistics costs were very high. They're coming down through the creation of infrastructure. But there are other costs of doing business, which are, let's say, because of cross subsidies. We look at railways, for example. On goods, there's a cross subsidy. You have to gradually move out of this. I think the movement is there in the right direction. It takes a large amount of effort in a federal state. But if each state, and many states are trying to do that, I think they're some are more progressive than the others. And the governance within them as well. The more stability in a state, from a political standpoint, the chances are decision-making will be faster, decision-making will be better. Healthy competition is also now coming up. I mean, states are vying for businesses to invest. States are vying for tourism. States are vying for different, let's say, economic activity. It's a good thing, and it must be encouraged.
Right. Sir, you mentioned in the article which you had written about the Product Nation, you mentioned about various industry clusters which have evolved over a period of time, and probably we need more of them in years to come. So, can you give a brief about how these clusters are helping in terms of helping India to becoming a product nation?
Clusterization is sometimes happens by chance. So you look at in Coimbatore, hosiery has become extremely strong, and therefore the entire ecosystem starts developing over generations, etc., and it becomes a cluster. But you look at the newer clusters, and those which I'm more familiar with is if you take the automotive cluster, and these clusters we know have formed around Chennai, have formed around Pune, have formed around Gurugram, because the OEMs there took leadership to then gradually the ecosystem developed. The ancillaries came in, the ancillaries then created sub-ancillaries, etc., etc. Pharmaceuticals, Hyderabad and Pune. Electronics, so Chennai and Bengaluru. And then you have now the new ones, which are space and defense, perhaps in Bengaluru and also at Hyderabad, amongst others. Now, how do these clusters help? Is that the whole chain becomes far more efficient. New product development, where you involve your clusters at a very early stage of your development process because they're physically close to you. So not always can it be physically close, but the closer the physical proximity, the chances are you will be able to engage much faster. You'll be able to change. If market changes, you can change much faster. But what we need over there is academic institutions and skill centers. If we can get academic institutions of higher learning, so I'm not talking of primary or secondary education, but tertiary education, then you start making your curricula, which is focused for that specific cluster from an education standpoint, as well as from a skill standpoint. And if they can all be housed within a particular geography, then the efficiency of that cluster in terms of outcomes and ability to navigate and adapt and change becomes much faster. much better.
So now let's look at some of the good examples. I think we've been seeing what is not there, but I think let's look at what are the positives which we can draw from the Indian companies who have actually transitioned to becoming the product companies. And there are quite a few examples, but through your lens, if we look at some of the examples.
Yeah, but being from the automobile and construction industry, you and I are from there. I think both the Tatas and the Mahindras, Tata Motors and Mahindras, have responded extremely well to, one, the change in the automobile sector in terms of aspirations, but also in terms of the sheer, let's say, regulatory force of moving from IC engines to an electric vehicle. But if you look at the design, I think we can be proud of the design. We can be proud of the specifications. We can be proud of the look, the feel, the touch. We can also be proud of the performance. And then maybe we are not the best yet in terms of service, but technology is helping us get there. The kind of apps you have in use today, you get real-time information. But a lot of the diagnostic, of course, is in the vehicle itself. I'm sure other sectors are doing well. Pharma, we hear so many good things about what Dr. Reddy's is doing or Biocon is doing, and there are so many other pharma companies, but I don't know enough about them to be able to comment. But there are definitely some sectors that have taken the lead in terms of moving and transitioning to becoming product companies. And I hope more and more of our software companies are also seen to be creating products the way the Googles and the Microsofts and some of the others have been able to create. We're moving in that direction, and I'm sure it will happen. While electronic hardware is going forward, but we've got to create products which have an Indian brand name on them. And maybe that is a journey that we will also go through in electronics.
Okay, now let's look at what are the importance of developing globally recognized brands. What are the key factors which are important in terms of creating those global brands?
Got to have the vision to do it and the desire to do it. Now, you can do it from scratch, or you can do it through an acquisition and then build on that acquisition. But a brand is only as strong as the product, physical or soft product behind that brand. And then it has to have repeatability, consistency. Day after day after day, you have to give what you've said you will give, but you've also got to innovate so that changing markets and expectations are also met with. So there has to be a huge amount of innovation there. You've got to design for service so that will there be problems in a mechanical or electronic product? The answer is yes. But the recovery is what the customer appreciates, and is the recovery which will bring you the loyalty. So distribution, quality of that distribution will bring, after all, the distribution is your extension. You may not own that distribution, but that distribution is your company's extension. Similarly, the supply chain is, you're only as strong as your supply chain is. So investment both in the supply chain as well as in the distribution is the responsibility of the mother company. And that's how that entire chain will deliver a product that is globally competitive and which you can be proud of putting your own name on that product. But for that, again, coming back to it, you have to invest in R&D, but that R&D has to be converted into innovative products that the consumer ultimately finds value and is willing to give you a price for it. Excellent. It's a long process, but it's a process that there is no option but to do that process. But we've got to believe that we can do it. And I think that belief, especially with the younger generation, can be done. And so I'm highly encouraged with what's going on. But you got to stay the course. Yeah. It's a long journey.
Now, any discussion today cannot happen without talking about AI. So, and we do have a good opportunity to make the difference in AI also. Of course, we are not the ones like how the USA or the China is doing in terms of progressing on the LLMs and so on and so forth. But it is still not too far, I guess, for India to catch up and do something about it. So what is your opinion? Any thoughts about AI and how India can take the benefit of this movement, so to speak?
No, I think India has the opportunity to take leadership over there. And in semiconductors, we are probably decades behind, and we may only be playing catch up. But in AI, a lot of our young people are already engaged in, let's say, the AI ecosystem and developing that AI ecosystem. Probably the single largest pool in the world, if you look at both in India and those of our, let's say, countrymen or former countrymen who have gone from here. So the leadership can still be taken, and it will be frugal as well, or relatively. China has shown that, I mean, I don't know if the numbers are correct, but even if they are wrong by a factor of 100, they'll still be that they've shown that they can do it with less computing power, and they can do it with, let's say, a far more frugal input. So we can still be the third force. And why not then the second force and the first force? Because of the fact that we can take leadership. And the AI mission, therefore, that has been created again is a way forward. But just as coming back to your GCC question, while it's great that they're working on it, but they're working for other countries and creating brands which are in other countries, can we entice them, motivate them, etc., and give them the opportunity of growth? What they're looking for is growth. Otherwise, everybody wants to work for one's own nation's benefit. But it's the opportunity to grow in that which is important.
Yeah, completely agree. I think, I mean, when we talk about India and the future, there's always very contrasting ideas, contrasting things, what we see. While you rightly mentioned that some of the best brains are working on AI and all other innovative products, but for other countries and other companies. And the challenge is how to bring them home and do it for Indian companies and Indian products. So before we end up this conversation, I would love to know more about what are your latest books which you're reading right now, because you continue to be actively writing a lot of articles about your domain area, of course, primarily manufacturing and your related areas. But what are the books you're reading now?
Actually, I'm reading a book called Leading Science and Technology India Next by a gentleman called Varun Agarwal. Now, I guess not many people have heard of him. I myself had not heard of Varun before somebody presented me the book. He's a co-founder of Aspiring Minds. And in that company also, let's say, heads R&D. So to tell you, I've not read so many books as I would have liked to. But I think the subjects that I'm trying to read about, one is, of course, geopolitics is extremely interesting. But the focus for me is how do we motivate ourselves on research and development? And the second is how do we ensure, which we've discussed, is that humanities becomes an integral part of the curriculum of a STEM student. And finally, how do we ensure that as companies, because I am an independent director on some boards, how do we ensure that environment, social, and governance aspects are pretty much on top of the agenda? And therefore, any article that I have an opportunity to read by people who've had far more experience, I do try and pick that up. So it's more reading articles and taking notes rather than reading books. But I'm not sure it's the right combination. I'd love to read books.
No, excellent. I think, I look at the book which you were talking about. I love to read that as well. And you mentioned about geopolitics. I think we are in some very, very interesting times. Though from distant, it looks interesting, but I am sure it is not something which is easy for many people across the world. So maybe it is a good opportunity for India to grab that opportunity when across the world there are uncertain global geopolitics which is happening.
No, it's always the case. You look at it from, let's say, an industry standpoint. You look at automobiles, for example. When a disruption takes place, it's the best opportunity for somebody new to jump in. And that's what's happened in the automobile industry, especially in EVs. Whole host of people, whether they sustain or not, I don't know. But the opportunity of jumping in, they have had. As much as which they wouldn't have had it been IC engines continuing, etc., etc. Same is in any form of disruption. And there is currently disruption going on, whether it's on trade, whether it is on virtually every aspect. Global supply chains, there's disruption. So therein lies the opportunity for us to show our prowess, show our capability, and find a way in. To take advantage of that and jump onto the bus instead of watching it go by or missing it altogether. So disruption is the best way for us to catapult ourselves far more than it would be in a very, very traditional growth, nothing happening kind of environment.
Excellent, sir. I think that's a very positive note to conclude our conversation today. And it's always a great pleasure to listen to you, to your thoughts. Absolute admiration for all your wisdom. Thank you for your time today. And I hope this conversation will enrich some of the people who are going to listen, watch this. Thank you for your
Thank you, SP. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure to see you across on the screen, and maybe we'll meet as well. But I'm very happy that the India Career Center, under your founding and leadership, has taken shape, and I hope you grow from strength to strength. All good wishes to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Namaskar.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. We sincerely wish you could take something from our conversation today and be able to apply it to your life in a positive way. We value your feedback. This can help us improve our future episodes. So share your thoughts to serve you better. If you want us to focus on a topic which you think is of importance, let us know. We will share our expertise in future episodes. So, see you soon with a new topic and help you in your career journey.